Hello ladies and gentlemen, today let's talk about not only honkaistarrail but Hoyoverse themselves. Now this is an idea that's been brewing for a long time due to the discourse between Hoyoverse's 3 games, and I finally decided to go into detail about it to present a theory to you. A theory that Hoyo deliberately designs good and bad aspects of their games, and either which way they will somehow find a way to benefit from it in the future. As someone that clears endgame consistently on all 3 of the big Hoyo games, I think I have some position of value you could listen to. This is gonna take a long time to explain, so without further ado, let's buckle up and get into this. What is this Hoyoverse theory? To start, let's get to the first point of evidence of this theory. In a GameSpot interview even before the release of honkaistarrail, Genshin Impact devs answered some questions in which this infamous line was given that became a meme among endgame players. Quote, "The Spiral Abyss is one of the most effective ways for players to test out their party compositions and combat strength. If we design another type of permanent endgame that is similar to the Spiral Abyss, it might end up creating excessive anxiety for our players. Not everyone is interested in Musk Reef." Yes, this could be considered one of the root origins of what eventually transformed into Genshin Could Never. There was a severe drought in the community of meta players that wanted Floor 13, harder content, and more endgame modes that they were not happy with this and laughed them out for it. Seriously, you can look at some forum or Twitter time capsules around this time and you would be shocked at what you see there if you're living in the current times of meta discourse. The rest of the interview won't be relevant for this video, but I do suggest you read it because it gives some really good insight on the psychology of Genshin Impact developers, especially their stance about power creep, which we will mention later. The fact of the matter is the Genshin devs have made their decision on what type of game Genshin Impact would be. It is not a game for endgame players looking to min-max a lot of damage with their combat system. They outright say that Genshin Impact is a chill variety game. They want to create gameplay in the future that doesn't necessarily need combat like TCG. I don't have the statistics of Genshin's player retention, and I don't trust Hoyoverse to be moral in their decisions at all, but I can't trust Hoyo to not be stupid about their money to make decisions like this without being based on factual data. And the fact of the matter is that Genshin is their golden goose, and making it as accessible as possible and as relaxed as possible is the best way to get money based on whatever data they have. In most gacha communities, and especially Genshin, who has a certain appeal to a large audience, meta players are a loud minority, which was not a surprising result to see the devs rejecting the idea of more endgame. I'm saying some pretty obvious stuff that was said even 2 years before that people have already said, but let's get to speculation now. How does this connect to honkaistarrail? As much as Genshin is a casual friendly game that doesn't focus on its combat and damage numbers, they aren't universally appealing. Even if those players are a smaller audience, these players that optimize damage numbers and like combat still provide money. They put their money on games that have a focus on a combat system, an evolving meta, multiple game modes, and endgame that actually matters. The amount of people that would buy something just to flex a really high score on an endgame that's typically difficult for a free-to-play is a fertile audience to design your game around and let them pay money to you. Sounds familiar? Once the Genshin devs realized that they were going to miss out on money from this audience of combat-focused gacha with an active endgame, Hoyoverse decided to create their own competition and directed the devs of honkaistarrail to catch the audience that they were missing out on Genshin. This was a form of a joke back when HSR released. People were kidding around about how Genshin doesn't implement qualities of life to implement it onto their next game to sell it to the people. Turns out this was not only correct, but the scale of it is much larger than what could have been imagined. If Genshin is a casual friendly game that has a lot of variety outside combat, in which you could enjoy yourself like TCG and Teapot, Starrail is more tuned to the hardcore audience because there's almost no other form of long-term gameplay outside of combat. Endgame is a revolving door every few weeks that incentivizes even more FOMO, since it's practically the only thing you could do after the minimal things you could do outside of combat. It's hard to ignore that red exclamation mark when you don't really have 6-hour exploration quests or a TCG that you can PvP with other players to waste your time. Starrail throughout 2 years has now shown more and more of this side and continues to define what its intended audience is. It's not for people who wish characters would would last forever like in Genshin. It's not for people who want to be strict casuals unless they have restraint or are too busy to deal with it. It is a game that has power creep, a constantly evolving meta that rapidly develops around a combat system which doesn't have many alternative ways to enjoy the game. Compare this to Genshin and what is referred to in the interview they gave. Quote, "If a character is only assessed by a single dimension of numerical strength, power creep could indeed be an issue. However, in Genshin Impact, the rules of gameplay are more impactful than how strong a character is. The rules is specifically talking about the reaction system, which can carry worse characters numerically just because they are of a specific element that can enable a reaction. StarRail's closest comparison mechanic is Super Break, and that's stretching it. We still do have one game to go from the big three, which is the newcomer, ZZZ. Zenless Zone Zero so far from a meta perspective is too early to judge, but you can already see signs of it being much like StarRail in its power creep, as evidenced by Bellabog Industries' Sans Anton getting power crept in version 1.x. Legitimately, they just kept releasing better characters that replaced them. But it's growing pains, and we'll see if they start getting more greedy and start power creeping their limited characters. The exploration really doesn't exist, and it's mostly a low maintenance game and is not as expensive in development and maintenance as Genshin, but definitely more expensive than StarRail in development costs. What really could ZZZ be competing for with these two games? Unlike StarRail and Genshin, there's one thing ZZZ has. It's pure, unadulterated, blatant character design bait. The character designs for ZZZ are absolutely insane, and you cannot see these characters existing in any one of those two games. With how StarRail and Genshin were built with predefined body types that they limited themselves with, they simply cannot do it. And trust me, people do not like that both of those games don't have enough risks in their designs, and having to be defaulted to 6 types of characters essentially is quite boring. ZZZ's mere existence of Ben Bigger and Billet Kid is enough to separate itself, and once again, Hoyo has made their own competition to fill that missing void. But I can also believe that ZZZ is simply just a comfort game for the devs to finally release whatever hell of a design that they have saved up that they couldn't use for Genshin and StarRail. Whatever barely disguised fantasies they have, I'm not judging, but I just could see it happening. In theory, people realizing StarRail is greedy, ZZZ is design bait, and Genshin is for babies should hurt Hoyoverse. But because they're selling their own competition, if you don't agree with all of these 3 takes, then Hoyoverse really doesn't lose anything from you. If you ever think to yourself while playing one of these games that this game is not for you, that's fine. Not for you of course, but for Hoyoverse. Each game Hoyo makes is made to catch an audience that wasn't captured from the last. You get into Genshin because it's popular. Don't like the stale endgame? Switch to HSR. Do you think HSR and Genshin's character design sucks? Go to ZZZ. If you don't like endgame being stingy in ZZZ or HSR, then try again with Genshin and you'd appreciate more after playing those 2 games. They will do their best and get every audience someday. That's their plan. By casting a larger net, they can gain more money, instead of banking on one title being a massive success and focus all their resources onto it. I suggest people start bringing this up every time there's an HSR versus Genshin discourse. Hoyoverse is only profiting from your war on both sides, and that's why you should all stop immediately fighting each other when the root cause is Hoyoverse when you're trying to be an activist about something, like power creep or anything like that. With all of that said, let's get into some hot takes. If Genshin is the golden goose of Hoyoverse, then I believe that honkaistarrail is the cash cow. Why do I say this when Genshin makes more money and has a wider audience? Here's the deal. As much as Genshin makes money, it has a much higher operational and development cost than StarRail could ever have. Just look at the genre itself. StarRail has no worries for climbing, collision, terrain, and balancing stuff like frame data, hitboxes, ICD, and all that other stuff that Genshin constantly has to keep checking for glitches so their game doesn't explode. With the size of Teyvat, it's almost wizard-like how they optimized it as much as they could. On top of that, StarRail does not have the combat co-op that Genshin has 24/7, which has to be insane in server costs. Meanwhile, StarRail is a glorified spreadsheet that looks very pretty with a mostly static environment. And with how rapid the meta develops and how much money a casual needs to ease through endgame without effort, people now realize the reality of this. StarRail is a cheaper game with a much more predatory design to grab your money through the meta than think Genshin ever would be. The inflation of pulls was a subtle indicator that you need more pulls in Star Rail to keep up with that meta than you would with Genshin. They practically have to do it as a balancing method. Genshin is the golden goose. It brings most of their player base, and because of that, they can't take any risks and have to be as safe as possible to keep it going. Star Rail is the cash cow that's dirt cheap in comparison and brings the same amount of money through a more tried and true method that's worked for decades now. Predatory endgame. Do they need to do this? Probably not, but we can see it's damn sure working. There's been a bit of notion now since Star Rail's endgame is predatory that people are starting to praise Genshin. Honestly, it makes me giggle. While I've spent most of this video ragging on Star Rail, I just put it out there that Genshin isn't excluded from criticism either. As much as Star Rail baits you to spending money to get broken characters after the next, Genshin demands a much more valuable resource: your time. Exploration games are much more demanding of your time, while in a turn-based game like Star Rail, you can know live content in a weekend or even auto-battle it. HSR feels like there's more pulls, well, not only because it does have more pulls, around 10 to 20 of them, but also it gives most of it up front with little interference, while Genshin needs you to work and waste your time finding 100 chests, solving multiple puzzles for it. Genshin's daily loop is also an example of this. Even with the qualities of life, it takes a lot of time to pop in and spend your stamina than it is to set the phone down and auto in Star Rail. Either way, both games are stealing something important from you that you need to recognize. Do not praise Genshin like this haphazardly. Both of these games can be equally worse in their greed. It's hard to say what the future is on either of these three games, and Hoyoverse themselves likely don't know either. Genshin is very close to the end, that winding down and being more generous because of it is part of the course. Star Rail is now at the point where Genshin started putting a power cap on their meta with Dendro, and ZZZ is still an infant to be judged. As consumers, you really can only hope they don't screw up because they're too big to fail or even take criticism at this point. There's rumors that apparently Hoyo is trying to do an Animal Crossing type game. We don't know any more than that, and I can't even imagine how a gacha for that would be viable for them. But if this is true, you can possibly fit this as another point of evidence. An even more chill version of Genshin that doesn't take your time and can even appeal to children. I don't think that's good morally, but sad to say, monetarily, it's a pretty good idea. I doubt endgame for an Animal Crossing type game would be really that horrible after all, unless it involves outrunning bees and mosquito catching. I hope you guys like this video about why this game isn't for you and why Hoyoverse is still benefiting from that fact. I hope you guys like watching, like, comment, subscribe, do the algorithm stuff. I know that this video comes off as a little doom posty, but I want it to be more of a reality check to players that once they think of quitting, I actually recommend people should quit gacha games in general. This is not a genre that you should be holding on hope to be better. It's a very predatory genre, and any step where you feel like these games are impeding on what is enjoying for you, then you should stop immediately because you'll get sunk cost fallacy into accepting other worse stuff. So yeah, I hope you guys like this video again. But yeah, that's all. I'll see you later.